Hello everybody. Welcome back. This is Professor West, and today we will be creating the video game Pong, basically. A one-player version of Pong. So the whole point of this game is that we're going to have a little paddle across the bottom that we can move using either the pointer on the computer or your finger if it's on your phone, just by dragging it back and forth. And we'll have a ball bouncing around the screen and try to keep it from hitting the bottom rail down here, the bottom edge. So it's a pretty simple game, but we're going to have several really neat techniques that we're going to apply that we haven't done yet. So let's just jump right in. Right off the bat, we're going to add a horizontal arrangement. So let's come over to Layout, and let's get this very top one that says Horizontal Arrangement. And a horizontal arrangement just lets us put several things side by side. Right underneath that, we're going to put a canvas. So let's come over to Drawing and Animation and add a canvas. And I'll explain both of these now. So a horizontal arrangement, first thing we're going to do is come over to the properties, and we're going to tell it to make the width fill parent. Whenever you put an item on another item, so as here we have the screen, and then we have the horizontal arrangement is tucked in, so it's tabbed over a little to let you know that it's part of the screen. So the screen is then the parent. So when I tell it to fill width, or when I tell it to go to the width and I tell it to fill parent, it's making it go all the way across the size of the screen. I'm not going to do anything with the height, and the reason is because arrangements automatically adjust the height depending on what you put in there. So in just a second, when I drag a couple small things in there, this is going to shrink up and fit them perfectly. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to grab a label and two buttons. So let's come over to User Interface, and we're going to start with a label, and see how small that got? And now we're going to add two buttons. Just stick them right in there with it. Notice up here how that blue line goes across, and then when I come down a little bit, now it's vertical, or right here, to let me know that that's where it's going to go. And I'm going to do the same thing with this other button. And don't worry if it doesn't fit completely on the screen. That's not something that we can't fix in just a minute. So let's go back to the label and click on it. Sometimes you have trouble clicking on things when they're small, so you can also do it over here in the components. If I wanted to do the button, and now here's the properties for the button, I want to go back and do the label. So I'm going to change the text in the label, and I'm just going to have it say the word score, colon, and a 0. In the previous games that we've made, we had two separate labels. So we had one that would say score, and then one that would just display the number. But this time we're going to do them both in the same one. So that's a neat little trick that we haven't really done yet. And I'm going to rename my label. And it's common in the programming world to use a 3-letter identifier to let you know what it is. So a label, I put LBL, and then score because it's the score label. That way, anytime I see this, no matter how many labels I have, and no matter how many buttons or whatever, I can have 100 things here. When I see LBL score, I know this is my label that deals with the score. It's that simple. So let's click on button 1 now, and we're going to change the text on button 1. And we're just going to put start. And I like to put it in all caps, but you don't have to. Has no value whatsoever as long as you try to be consistent. And I'm going to call this one, I'm going to rename it. So I'm going to come down here to rename, and I'm going to call it BTN for button, start. And that way I know later when I get into the other screen and I can't see my buttons, I know that's my start button. And we're going to do the same thing for the other button. I'm just going to call it, I'm going to put reset, and then I'm going to come up and change the name. So I'm going to make sure and click the rename, and I'm going to call it BTN reset. So now our top area is set up. So the next thing I want to do is I want to come to my canvas. So I'm going to click on the canvas, or you could click on it over here. Either way, it doesn't matter. And I'm going to tell it to fill the parent. So I'm going to come over here to height, and I'm going to tell it fill the parent. And it's going to become as tall as the rest of the screen. It didn't overlap the other item on the screen. So if there was something coming down this side, when I do the width, it wouldn't cover that. So let's go do the width and tell it to fill parent. Since there's nothing there, it goes all the way over to the side. So now our canvas is this big. Canvases are very important because pictures and objects like that have to be on a canvas in order to exist. It cannot exist if it's not on a canvas. So this will be our screen that we're playing on. And to do so, let's come over here to where it says drawing and animation again. We got the canvas from there a minute ago. And now we're going to get a ball and drag it onto the screen, somewhere up here by the top, doesn't really matter where. And then we're also going to grab an image sprite and drag it onto the screen. Now the image sprite is going to be our paddle. We don't have to rename the ball because it's already a ball, and we're only going to have one, so that's fine. But for image sprite, let's go ahead and rename that. So we're going to click on it, we're going to do rename, and I'm just going to call it paddle sprite. And a sprite is just a way of letting us know that we can make it an image. So it's kind of like a container that holds the image. So now I have to go in and tell it to do the image. So I'm going to come over here to picture, and I'm going to click on it, and I get this drop down box that comes up. If I already had a picture uploaded, I could just choose it right here, but since I don't, I have to go to upload file, and then I'm going to have to go to choose file. And you'll notice here I have a whole bunch of stuff in this. I'm just going to choose this one that's called paddle, and I'm going to open it and click OK. And now my paddle is going to be right here, but it's huge. I mean, that wouldn't be a very fun game if I'm using this paddle. There's almost no room on either side for the ball to go. So let's come over to the height and the width, and let's shrink it down a little. I'm going to come to this line that says pixels. And pixels are just tiny little dots that go across the screen that show stuff. So there's a lot of pixels right here. So right now, I'm going to choose something like 30 pixels for the height. And it won't really change until I do the width also. So for the width, I'm going to do something like 80. And I think that's still a little too big. So I'm going to go back into the width, and I'm going to shrink it down a little further. I might do 40. I think that's a pretty good size for my paddle. And in programming, what I just did is very common. We try something, we don't like it, so we just fix it. Because we don't always know how big we want stuff. There's no way really, unless you're just really good, to know that that's exactly 40 pixels and that's how big you want it. Most of the time, it's just going to be try it and fix it and try it and fix it. So we have one more thing we need to do. We need to add some sound. So let's come over to media, and let's come down. The fifth one says sound, and we're just going to drag it right onto the screen. Now notice it doesn't show up on the screen. Let me scroll down a little. It actually appears below the screen in the non-visible components. And the reason is because the person playing your game is not going to see it on the screen. So they stick it down here so it's out of your way while you're doing your screen. So the last thing we need to do now is we need to upload some sounds that we're going to use. So I'm going to upload, I'm going to choose a file, and I'm going to upload this one that says buzzer. And all that's going to do is go buzz, kind of like an NBA buzzer on a basketball game. And I'm going to use that in a little bit for whenever the ball hits this bottom line and you lose. I'm going to upload one other sound, and that's the Noink. And you can use any sounds you want. I just am using these because the MIT people that created the App Inventor put it up for free for us. So everybody can use it. You can go to their website and download it yourself. And all the Noink does is every time the ball hits a wall, it's going to go Noink, 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 just so it's some kind of a noise. So makes it a little better whenever you have some sounds and stuff. So let's go. That's all it is to setting up the screen. So let's go into the blocks and let's start doing it. So the very first thing I want, I'm going to go back to the designer so I can show you, is I want the person to click on the start button. And when they click on the start button, that's when the ball's going to start moving and we're going to start having control of the paddle. So that's when the game's going to start. So that's what I'm going to do first. I'm going to come to the start button and I'm going to get the one that says .click. That's a click event. And what that means is somebody clicked on the button. And all the code that we put in here is going to be what happens when somebody clicks on the button. So the first thing I want to do is move the ball to the proper starting location. So I'm going to come over to the ball, and I'm going to come down to the purple section, and I'm going to get the one that says Move To. And that's going to let me tell it where I want the ball to be. Now, this is a little tricky, but not really bad. So let me go into the designer and show you what we're about to do. The width of this screen could vary depending on who's using it and what size phone or tablet they have. So somebody may have a 3-inch screen, somebody may have a 5-inch screen or an 8-inch screen or whatever. And I want the ball to start in the middle. So I'm going to tell it to get how wide the canvas is and then divide that by 2, so that'll be the middle. So that's all I'm going to do here. And to do so, I'm going to go into Math, and I'm going to get this little block that has the divide symbol, the 7th or 8th one down, has the divide symbol. And that's going to be the one that I use for my formula. And I'm going to come over to the canvas, and I'm going to scroll all the way down to the bottom of the green section. Remember, these are all in alphabetical order by this last one. I'm going to get the one that says width. And there's always 2. There's the one that gets the width and the one that sets the width. And that's true for all these. I want the getter. These are called getters and setters. The one that does not say set is the one that gets. So basically it's just going to ask what the value is. So this one right here is going to go find out how big the screen is. And then I'm going to add a number at the very top. I'm just going to get a number block, and I'm going to make that a 2. So if it goes and it finds out that my screen is 8 inches, then divided by 2, it's going to be 4 inches. And that is going to be my X location. So it's going to be 4 inches of an 8-inch screen, or 2 inches of a 4-inch screen, or whatever. And then I want the ball to start off at the very top. And on the screen, the X goes across and the Y goes down. So the Y starts with 0 right up here at the very top of the canvas. And by the time it gets to the bottom, it's around 500, depending on the size of the canvas. So I want it right here at the top. So I'm just going to tell it 0. So I'm going to go to Math. I'm going to get this number 0 and plug it right in. And so now it's going to start off halfway across the screen and right at the top. Now I need to do several more things to my ball. First, I'm going to come down to the green, and I'm going to enable it. And that just tells it that the ball can move. So I'm going to grab that, and I'm going to plug it in. It's enabled, and I have to tell it true or false. So I'm going to grab a true from Logic. I went over to Logic, and I'm just going to grab a true and plug it in. So now it is the ball enabled? Yes. Let's set it to enabled. So that means it can move. Now that I've done that, I need to tell it how I want it to move. So I'm going to go back into the ball, and I'm going to get the heading. The heading is just the direction that it's moving. But here's the thing. I don't want it to go the same direction every time it starts. That would be kind of boring, because I would always know where the paddle needs to be. I want it to randomly pick a direction. So to do so, hold on a second. There it is. The MIT App Inventor people were nice enough to share this picture also. So I can see what the numbers for the heading is just by looking at this. If I want my heading to go at 220 degrees angle, then I'm going to just put 220, and it's going to go from here, it's going to go at that angle. And if I wanted it to go at 320, it would go at this angle, this direction. But I don't always want it to go the same. So that's about where I want, is somewhere between 220 and 320. So it could go anywhere in here. And that's what I'm going to remember. So I want 220 to 320. So I'm going to come back into the blocks, and I'm going to tell it my heading is going to be, and I'm going to go to Math. And if you scroll all the way up, this first long one here says random integer from 1 to 100. And I'm going to plug that in. but I want to change these numbers because 0 is straight to the right, so 1 would slightly be above that. And 90 is straight up, so 100 slightly to the left. So if I leave it like it is, then it's going to randomly go either right or up and a little to the left. And that's not what I want. I want it to go down and to the left or down and to the right or somewhere in between. So I need 220 to 320, roughly. And you can play around with it. 225 to 325. Why not? And now it will randomly pick any heading between 225 and 325, and that's the direction it'll go. The next thing I want to do is tell it how fast I want the ball to move. So let's go back to the ball, scroll all the way down, and let's get this one that says set the speed. And the speed is just how fast the ball is going to move. And I'm going to start off giving it a simple speed of, I'm going to use a number block here. I just went to math and got another number block like we've done. And I'm just going to put a 5 in there. And we can play around with it. Once you get it going, then you can say, oh, 5's too slow. I want to start off at 10. Or 5's too fast. I want to drop it down to 2. Whatever. So now we're going to do one more thing. We're going to go back to ball. We're going to come back into the green section. And we're going to get this one that's about 6th one down that says interval. And we're going to click on it and put it in there. And I'll explain this in a second. Let's go to math and let's get a number. And I'm going to put 1,000 for now. So here's what's going to happen. These are milliseconds, which is 1,000th of a second, which means 1,000 of them is 1 second. So if my ball is going to move from here down to here in 1 second, I'm telling it every 1 second, update it and show me. So it would sit here for a second, and then all of a sudden it would appear down here. Well, that's not what I want. I want it to look like it's actually moving. So I'm going to reduce this interval, and I'm just going to make it 10 milliseconds. That means it's going to update a whole lot of times every second. It's going to go so it's going to look like it's actually moving. And let's go to the emulator, and you can see this. Let me pull it up. When I click the start button now, I've told it to put the ball in the center and at the top. I've told it to enable the ball so it can move. The heading's going to be somewhere between this direction and this direction. The speed's going to be 5 and the interval's going to be 10. So when I hit start, it's going to go like that. And we haven't told it what to do with anything else, but anytime I hit start, that's what's going to happen. It's going to randomly go. So if I was to change this interval to 1,000, like I just said, then now when I click it, see how it's waiting? It's kind of jumping. It's waiting a whole second to move just that 5 whatever. So 5 pixels. So it's really taking it a long time. I don't want that. I want this to be every 10 seconds or every 10 milliseconds. So I think that's a much better. When I hit the start button, there it goes. That's a pretty good speed. And again, if I change the speed here, then it would go a lot faster or slower. So now you saw when it got to the edge and it just didn't know what to do. Let's fix that. So we're going to come to the ball, and we're going to use this third golden one that says edge reached. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. Programmers are not known for being creative when it comes to naming things. Edge reached means it reached the edge. So when the ball reaches the edge, do this. And that's all there is to it. So now we're going to go back into the ball, and we're going to come down and we're going to get the one that says bounce. And we're going to plug that in. So now we're telling it when we reach an edge to bounce. And we have to add this extra argument in, and I'll tell you why. It automatically knows when you hit an edge, when we're using this function, it automatically knows when it reaches the edge, and it stores it in this variable so it remembers that edge. Here's what I mean. If it's coming down this way and it hits this edge, the computer knows that this edge is -3. So it's going to remember that it hit edge -3. That's the left edge, because we don't just say left and right. And if it's coming down this way and it hits this one, we know it's 3. So for now, we're just going to tell it no matter what edge it hits, bounce off of it, which means it comes off at an appropriate angle. Later, we're going to tell it when we get to this -1 edge that we're going to do something different. But for now, we're going to leave it like this. And that'll be good enough. So now, when I run this, see my ball gets to the edge and it bounces? That's all we've just told. So now that we've told it what to do when it bounces, we need to tell it what happens when it collides with something. And it's just as easy as it was to change the edge. Let's go to ball and click on it, and we're going to come up and we're going to get the top one that says collided with. And the great part about this little game is we don't care what it collides with, because there's only one thing on the screen, and that's a paddle. So that's our sprite. So it's not going to be hard to figure out what it's colliding with here. So we're going to tell it when it collides with anything, we're going to change the ball heading. So let's come up and let's get this one where we already have it, the second one down where it says ball heading. Let's right click on it and duplicate it. And that makes an exact copy of it that we can plug in down here. And we're going to have to change it a little bit. So I'm going to take this random off, just grab it and drag it off. And we're going to go up and we're going to get a subtraction. So go to math, and the fourth one has a subtraction matrix here. So we're going to tell it that the ball heading is going to change to, and we're going to get a number. Let's go up to math and get a number. And let's go to our ball, and let's scroll all the way back down, and let's get the heading. So we're going to come over here to where it says ball 1 heading without the word set, and we're going to get it. So now we're going to tell it when it collides with the paddle that the new heading is going to be 360 degrees, or 360 I should say, minus whatever the current heading was. So if it's coming down like this, that's going to make it go up like that. That's all we're doing. And I'm going to plug it in. And now you can see that. See how it hit that paddle there? And it changed right when it came up. It should hit it again there. When it came up and it hit the paddle and it went back down. That's all we're talking about doing here. I'm going to delete this one because I don't need it. Yes. And now we need to do something else. Whenever we hit that paddle, we want to keep track of the score. So there's a couple of different ways we can do this, but we're going to set up a procedure. So let's come over to procedures, and let's get this very top one that says to procedure do. And we're just going to plug it in over here on the screen. We're just going to stick it over here. And I'm going to name this score tracker, because this is my score tracker. This is what's going to keep track of my score. And to do so, I need a variable. So I'm going to come over to variables, and I'm going to get this very top one that says initialize global variable name. And I'm going to name that score. So now this variable is going to keep track of my score. And I'm going to come to math, and I'm going to get this 0, and I'm going to plug it in, because I'm going to start it off at 0. My little score tracker here is going to add 1 to it every time we hit the paddle. But it's also going to be used in other places. That's why I'm creating a procedure. If you're only going to do it once in one place, then you just put the code. But if you're going to have it do it several times, then instead of having several of the same exact lines of code, you just do it once in a procedure. So the first thing I need to do is add a local variable. So let's point to this little gear icon. And you see how it comes up with the ability to add an input? When I add one, it puts an X here. That's a variable. And you could add as many as you wanted. I could put like 10 here if I wanted. I don't. So I'm going to click on this X, and I'm going to rename it something of value to me. So I'm going to call it new score. And this might not make sense right off the bat, but it will in just a few minutes after we get a couple other things done. So let's go ahead and let's just add some stuff. Let's come over here to our variable and point to it, and we're going to get the set. That's the one that has the word set on it. So it's going to set our global score to be, and we're going to come up and point to this variable, and we're going to use get new score. Because what's going to happen is when I call this procedure, I'm going to send it a score. and it's going to take whatever that score is and it's going to set it to my global variable of score. And that'll make more sense in a second also. So now I want to come over to my label over here on the left, because I want to update my label that keeps track of the score. And I'm going to come down and I'm going to tell it to set the label score text. And I'm going to plug it in. Now remember, when we created this, we come over into the designer, we put score colon and the number 0 all in one label. And that's what I want to keep doing here. So to do so, I'm going to move over a little bit so you can see, I need to come to where it says text, and I need to get this second one that says join. That lets me join two things together. Now I'm going to come back to text, and I'm going to get a blank text, and I'm going to put it over here. I'm going to plug it in. And I'm going to put the word score, and a colon and a space. So I'm going to join the word score with whatever the score is. So let's point back up here to our score variable and do a get and plug it in. And then I'm going to plug it in here. So what's going to happen is, let's say my score is 7. When I call this function, it's going to have 7 as the new score. So my new score is going to be 7, which this one's going to set it to the global score. And then my label is going to display the word score plus whatever the score is, so 7. And that's what we're doing here. And the reason we're doing this is because there's going to be a lot of different ways we can use it in just a few minutes. I'm moving these down some. Actually, I don't need that one down. I need it over here. I mean, it doesn't really matter where you put it. I'm just trying to give myself a little bit of room so I can keep it all on the screen for you. So I'm going to come over to procedures now. And remember a while ago there was only 2 of them? Well, now there's a third one. That's the score tracker that we just created. So I'm going to grab that and I'm going to plug it in, because every time I collide with the ball, I want to call the score tracker so it can change the score. And I'm going to come and get a math with a plus sign. That's the 4th one. And I'm going to put it over here for just a second. And then I'm going to come up and I'm going to point to the score variable, and I'm going to tell it to get the score. And I'm going to plug that in. And then I'm going to come over to math, and I'm going to get a number box, and I'm going to plug that in, and I'm going to change it to 1. So this box right here tells it to get the global score. So let's say your score is 7, and add 1 to it. So now it would be 8. This box would be 8. When I plug it in here, it's going to tell it to call the score tracker and send 8 to be the new score. The new score would then update the global score to 8. And then it would update my label to tell it score is 8. So that's what we're doing here. I know that seemed a little complicated, and I don't know why it's trying to give me an error there, but it's not an error, but it does that sometimes. So now every time I collide with my paddle, it's going to update my score for me, and it's going to update my label that tells me the score. So the next thing I want to do is I want to reset my button. So over here in the designer, I have this button that says reset. So when my ball hits this bottom screen, I'm going to want to reset everything. So that's going to start my score over, that's going to move my ball and my paddle and whatever I want to do. So I'm going to come over to my button reset, and I'm going to hit click. Because when somebody clicks on this button, that's when I want it to happen. And what do I want to happen? Well, first of all, I want to put my ball back where it goes. I've already created that function right here, this little purple one, when I told it to go halfway across the screen and divide it by 2, and then 0. So I'm just going to right click and duplicate this whole little section of code and plug it right in there. So now when they hit the button reset, my ball is going to go back to the starting position. I'm also going to take this second one, this green one here that says ball enabled. I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to plug it in, but then I'm going to point over here where it says true, and I'm going to click the drop down and select false, because I don't want my ball to start when they hit the reset button. I want it to start when they hit the start button, which is what this one's going to do. So it'll just sit there at the top ready to go. And then last but not least, I want to call my score tracker. So I'm going to go to procedures, and I'm going to get my score tracker, and I'm going to go to math, and I'm going to get a 0, and I'm going to plug that in. And here's why. When they hit the button reset, this score tracker is going to send the value of 0 to my function over here, to my procedure. So new score will now have the value of 0, which means that global score will get updated to 0, and my label will say score:0. So I'm resetting the whole thing just by sending a 0 to that function. Okay, so the only thing we have left to do now is to tell it what happens when the paddle hits the ball. I'm sorry, we've already told it what happens when the paddle hits the ball. Now we have to tell it how to let us move the paddle. Because right now the paddle's just sitting there, and if the ball happens to hit it, it does. But that's not what we want. We need to be able to drag that paddle around. So we're going to come over to our paddle sprite, and we're going to click on it, and we're going to grab this one that says dragged. That's the second one. And we're going to drag it onto our screen here. And now we're going to come back to our paddle sprite. We're going to come down to the purple section, and we're going to get the one that says move to. That's the fourth one. And we're going to tell it where to move. And this is simple enough. We're going to tell it to move to wherever our finger is on the screen. So that's what these are. Whenever you drag your finger across the screen, just like with the one over here, where when it reaches the edge, it remembers what edge you're on. Well, when we drag across the screen, it's going to remember where we're at. And that's the X. So we're going to get the X of wherever our finger is and make that the X for our paddle. So our paddle will move back and forth with us as we move our finger. Now we don't want the Y to move up and down. We want the Y to stay exactly where it's at. So we're going to come to the paddle, and we're going to scroll all the way down, and we're going to tell it to get this one that says paddle Y. And the reason is, in our designer, no matter where we put this paddle, now it's going to stay that height. So if I decide I want it a little lower and I move it down here, it's going to remember that height, and that's how high it's always going to be when I move it across. Even if my finger starts going up as I move it, or down, the paddle's going to stay the same height. Okay, so now we have one last big one to do. Right now, let's pull up my game. I can move it if it comes up. I'm going to pause till it does. So here's where we are right now with our game. We hit the start button. We can move this back and forth. It keeps track of our score. And the problem is, when I hit this last one down here, it doesn't end the game. It should. If I hit reset, it comes back up and it waits for me to hit start again. So all this is working perfectly. All I need to do now is tell it to keep doing what it's doing if it's hitting this wall, or this wall, but end if it hits this last wall. And that's where we're at right now. To do so, we have to add some stuff into our edge reached commands over here. Right now, we've told it to bounce no matter what edge it reaches. We're going to take this out for now. We're just going to put it off to the side because we're going to use it again. And we're going to come up to the control, and we're going to get what they call an if then else. And let me explain what this means. It's just like it is if you're speaking in English. There's a condition, there's what happens if it's true, and there's what happens if it's not. So I like to use a hunger one. So let me say this. If you're hungry, then go eat, else go outside and play. Something like that. Something real simple. So the first thing we need is our condition. And remember in our picture a while ago, I showed you that this bottom edge is number -1. Because it goes this way up to -4, and then it starts at the top and goes around to 4. So I want it to keep going, keep bouncing around, unless the edge that it hits is -1. So to do so, I need to come over to math, and I'm going to get this one that has an equal sign on it. This lets us compare two things. And what I'm going to compare is the current edge. So let's point to our edge and use get edge to -1. So let's go get a math and a number. and do -1. So if the edge that we hit is -1, that means the bottom edge, then do this. Well, what do we want to do? The first thing we want to do is we want to tell it so in our label. So let's come over to label, and let's come down to text, and we'll add that right here into our then statement. And then we're going to tell it what we want to display. So come over to text, and let's get the empty box at the top. And we're just going to plug it right in, and I'm going to put something like game over. This way my label will say game over, and the player will know that the game's ended. The next thing I want to do is I want to stop my ball from bouncing around. So I'm going to go to ball, and actually we've already done this. Here it is, right over here in this reset where it says ball enabled is false. I'm just going to copy that, I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to plug that right in there. So when they reset bottom edge, our ball's going to stop moving. Now I'm going to take this bounce and I'm going to put it into the else statement. So if the edge that we reach is the bottom, change the score to game over and stop moving the ball. Otherwise, keep bouncing. That's all we're telling it to do. So let me come back up to my emulator, and I'm going to hit start, and oh, I already hit it, so the ball stopped, and it says game over up here at the top. So I'm going to reset it, I'm going to start it again, and I lost again. So there it is. That's what we've done so far. Now we need to do two more things. We need to add some sound. We haven't done that yet. We don't have to add sound. You could stop right now and this is a perfectly playable game. But what would be the fun in that? So let's come over here where it says sound, and we're going to get the one that says set the source. That's the next to last one. And we're just going to pull it right over here to the side. Don't put it in yet. We're also going to get the one that says play, the purple one here, the second one that says .play. We're going to put it here. Think of these two as being linked together, which technically they are now. I linked it together. So I'm going to set the source, and I'm going to do so by getting one of these texts, and I'm going to tell it the name of the file that I want to use. Remember we uploaded some while ago? I'm going to come over here to the designer, and here are the files, the sound files that we uploaded. You have to remember the name exactly. It's buzzer with a capital B .mp3. So I'm going to come back to my blocks, and I'm going to tell it that this source is buzzer B with a capital B uzzer .mp3. Oops. If I do anything else, this won't work. But now I've told it that my source is that buzzer mp3 that I added, which is just going to go bzz. And then I'm going to tell it to play it. And I'm going to plug both of these right in to my one where the game's over. So now if the edge is -1, it's going to display game over, the ball's going to stop moving, and it's going to make a buzzer sound. Bzz. That's all that does. And we need to do that 2 more times because we don't always want that sound to play. So let's come back to sound. Let's get the source, or set the source I should say. And let's come back to sound and get the play and add those together. And let's come back to text and let's add that in. And the other one that I've uploaded is called Noink, N-O-I-N-K .mp3 with a capital N. And Noink just makes this annoying little sound where when it bounces off a wall it goes noink, 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 noink until you lose. So anytime we bounce off a wall, we're just going to add those in. And last but not least, we're going to add it into our paddle also. So I'm going to duplicate this one, and I'm going to add it into when it collides with the paddle. Then I'm going to duplicate this play, and I'm going to add it in. So now it'll also make that sound when my paddle hits the ball. And I wish I could demonstrate this, but on the emulator you can't hear my sounds. I can hear it, but you can't. So take my word for it, every time the ball goes around the screen it goes noink, 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 noink until it hits the bottom screen, or the bottom wall, and then it goes brrr, and it resets. That is it. That's the entire game. So this is now a completely playable game. You can add it into your emulator and play it yourself. You can go if you've already set up your phone to be able to connect, you can go into the connect one and do that. So you can play it on your phone, or you could go into build and actually build it. And that way you could download it onto your phone and play it even when you're not near your computer. But that's the entire game, completely finished. Hope you enjoyed this, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel.